The IED detonated at 0647 hours on a Thursday morning, 3 miles outside Fallujah. The blast was massive enough to flip a 12,000-pound armoured Humvee like a child's toy, to turn sand into glass, to transform 5 men into casualties in the space between heartbeats. Staff Sergeant Daniel Kearns, 32 years old, decorated veteran, proud atheist, survived the explosion. But what he saw in those final seconds before losing consciousness would haunt him far more than the shrapnel that tore through his body. He saw a woman in white standing in the smoke, and weeks later, in a military hospital 6,000 miles from the blast site, he would see her again. If you think faith is just for the weak, if you believe miracles are stories we tell ourselves to cope with chaos, if you've ever dismissed the sacred because you couldn't measure it, then you need to hear what happened to the soldier who called the Virgin Mary a myth. Daniel Kearns came from the kind of Catholic family where faith wasn't just practiced, it was saturated into every corner of life. Sunday Mass was non-negotiable. Grace before meals was automatic. Rosaries hung from bedroom doorknobs like talismans against the darkness. His mother, Margaret Kearns, kept a small altar in the living room of their Baltimore row house, votives flickering before a plaster statue of the Virgin Mary, prayer cards tucked into the frame. Daniel had believed once, with the unquestioning faith of childhood. He'd been an altar boy, memorized his catechism, even considered the priesthood for about a week in 7th grade before discovering girls and basketball. Then his mother got cancer. He was 19, home from his first year at community college, when the diagnosis came. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, too advanced for surgery, treatment options limited to buying time. Margaret Kearns faced her death sentence with the same faith she'd lived her life, kneeling before her altar every morning and evening, rosary beads clicking through her fingers, whispering prayers to the Virgin Mary who'd been her companion since childhood. "She'll intercede," his mother told Daniel with absolute conviction, even as chemotherapy stole her hair and her strength. "Our Lady hears the prayers of mothers. She'll heal me, or she'll carry me home. Either way, I'm in her hands." Daniel wanted to believe her, tried to. He prayed with her, holding her frail hand as she recited Hail Marys in a voice growing weaker each day. He lit candles. He attended Mass. He bargained with God in the desperate way people do when watching someone they love dissolve before their eyes. His mother died on a Tuesday morning in April, with spring rain streaking the hospital windows and a rosary wrapped around her wrist. Her last words were a whispered prayer, "Holy Mary, Mother of God." She never finished it. The faith that had sustained Margaret Kearns through 62 years of life failed to save her. Or so Daniel saw it. The Virgin Mary she'd prayed to every single day, who'd supposedly heard the prayers of mothers, had been silent, absent, useless. At the funeral, Daniel stood beside the casket and stared at the statue of the Virgin Mary on the altar. His mother had believed so completely, had wasted so much breath on prayers that went nowhere. And for what? To die anyway, her faith rewarded with nothing. Something hard and cold calcified in Daniel's chest that day. Not sudden rage. That would have been cleaner. Instead, a slow crystallization of contempt for the superstition that had given his mother false hope, that had promised intervention and delivered only empty rituals. He stopped going to Mass, stopped praying. When his father tried to talk to him about maintaining faith even through grief, Daniel cut him off. "Faith in what, Dad? In a God who watches good people suffer? In a Virgin Mary who's too busy being painted on church walls to actually help anyone?" 2 years later, Daniel enlisted in the army, not from patriotism particularly, but from the need to do something that felt real. War was honest in a way faith never had been. Bullets killed you or they didn't. IEDs exploded or they didn't. You lived or you died. No prayers changed those outcomes, only training, preparation, and luck. By 2007, Staff Sergeant Daniel Kearns was on his 3rd deployment to Iraq. He was good at his job, calm under fire, decisive, the kind of NCO younger soldiers wanted to serve under. He'd earned a Bronze Star for pulling 2 wounded men from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. He was respected, capable, and absolutely certain that the universe operated on physics and probability, not divine intervention, which made Corporal Luis Ortega's piety particularly irritating. Ortega was 23, from a small town in Texas, with a rosary he wore under his uniform and a habit of whispering prayers before every patrol. He kept a laminated prayer card of Our Lady of Guadalupe in his helmet. He made the sign of the cross before meals in the chow hall, unbothered by the secular scepticism that defined most of the unit. Daniel found it infuriating. "You really think that helps?" he asked one evening, in the barracks, watching Ortega kneel beside his bunk to pray. "You think the Virgin Mary is taking requests from Iraq?" Ortega looked up, his young face serious. "I think faith helps me be the soldier I need to be, Sergeant. Keeps me centered when things get crazy." Faith didn't keep Rodriguez from getting his legs blown off last month. Faith didn't stop that mortar from hitting second platoon. What good is prayer if it doesn't actually change anything? "Maybe it changes us, not the circumstances," Ortega said quietly. "Maybe that's the point." Daniel snorted. "That's just psychological coping dressed up in religious language. Meditate, talk to yourself, pray. It's all the same. Your brain trying to manage fear, but calling it a conversation with Mary doesn't make it real." Ortega didn't argue. He simply returned to his prayers, lips moving silently, and something about his refusal to engage enraged Daniel more than argument would have. It felt like dismissal, like pity. The confrontation that would haunt Daniel happened during a pre-mission briefing on April 18th, 2007. The chaplain, Captain Father Michael Walsh, had come to offer a blessing before a supply convoy headed into Fallujah, a route known for IED activity, where 3 vehicles had been hit in the past month. "Let us pray," Father Walsh began, and most of the room bowed their heads. Daniel conspicuously checked his watch. The chaplain prayed for protection, for wisdom, for the safe return of all personnel. He invoked the Blessed Virgin Mary's intercession, and when he finished, Daniel laughed, not a quiet chuckle, a full, sharp bark of laughter that cut through the solemn atmosphere like a gunshot. Every head turned. Father Walsh's expression remained neutral, but hurt flickered in his eyes. "Something funny, Sergeant Kearns?" asked Lieutenant Morrison, the convoy commander. Daniel should have shut up, should have mumbled an apology and moved on. But something about the moment, the earnest prayers, the bowed heads, the invocation of a virgin who'd failed his dying mother, snapped whatever filter usually governed his mouth. "You want me to be honest, sir? Yeah, it's funny. We're about to drive through one of the most dangerous stretches of road in Iraq, and we're asking a 2,000-year-old Jewish woman who may or may not have existed to protect us. That's not prayer. That's magical thinking." The room went dead silent. Even the usually boisterous soldiers seemed to hold their breath. "Sergeant Kearns," Father Walsh said carefully, "I understand not everyone shares the same faith, but perhaps—" "The Virgin Mary's a myth, Father. A story we tell ourselves. She's never shown up for anyone. Not in Bethlehem, not in Baltimore, and sure as hell not in Fallujah. You want divine protection? Check your body armor and trust the gunner to do his job. That's what actually keeps people alive." Ortega, sitting 3 rows back, stared at Daniel with an expression of profound sadness. "Sergeant, you shouldn't—" "Shouldn't what? Tell the truth? Your rosary is string and beads, Ortega. It's not a force field, and pretending a dead woman from ancient history gives a damn about our supply convoy is dangerous because it makes people complacent." Lieutenant Morrison's voice was ice. "That's enough, Sergeant. You're dismissed. I'll see you at the vehicles." As Daniel left, he heard Ortega whisper to the soldier next to him, "He doesn't know what he's saying. You don't mock a mother, even the Blessed Mother. That always comes back." Daniel heard it, and didn't care. He was right, and they were clinging to fairy tales. And if that made him the arsehole, fine. Someone needed to inject reality into the fantasy. 12 hours later the IED would detonate, and everything Daniel believed about reality would shatter along with his body. The convoy rolled out at 600 hours under a sky still dark enough to hold stars. 6 vehicles, 2 Humvees, 3 cargo trucks, 1 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle bringing up the rear. Daniel rode in the second Humvee, serving as vehicle commander, with Private First Class Tommy Reeves driving, Specialist Marcus Chen manning the .50 Cal, and Ortega in the rear right seat. They'd done this route 17 times, knew every checkpoint, every potential ambush site, every stretch where you held your breath and scanned for disturbed dirt that might indicate a buried bomb. The danger was constant but manageable if you stayed alert, stayed smart, followed protocols. The morning was quiet, too quiet, in the way that made experienced soldiers nervous. No civilians on the road, no traffic, just empty desert and the low rumble of diesel engines. "I don't like this," Chen said over the radio. "Feels wrong." "Stay sharp," Daniel replied. "Could be nothing. Could be something." In the back seat, Ortega was praying. Daniel could see him in the rearview mirror, rosary wrapped around his hand, lips moving silently. Part of Daniel wanted to tell him to focus on his sector, to stop wasting mental energy on appeals to the non-existent, but he kept quiet. They were 3 miles outside Fallujah when Tommy Reeves called out, "Sergeant, disturbed dirt ahead, left side, 50 meters. Daniel keyed his radio. "Lead vehicle, possible IED, left side your position." The world exploded. Not ahead where Tommy had spotted the disturbed dirt. Behind, a massive buried bomb detonating directly beneath their Humvee with a force that lifted the entire vehicle off the ground. The sound was beyond sound, a physical wall of pressure that crushed eardrums and stopped hearts. The Humvee flipped, rotating, in mid-air like a falling coin. Daniel felt himself lifted, weightless, as the vehicle tumbled. Equipment, bodies, debris spun in a chaos that seemed to last forever, and no time at all. Something struck his legs with devastating force. Something else hit his chest. His helmet cracked against metal. The Humvee landed on its side in a shower of dirt and fire. Fuel ignited. Ammunition cooked off with sharp pops. Daniel couldn't move his legs, couldn't feel them. Blood filled his mouth, copper-tasting and hot. Somewhere in the chaos, someone was screaming. Maybe multiple someones? Daniel tried to respond, tried to take command, tried to do anything, except lie there broken and bleeding, but his body wouldn't obey. His vision dimmed. He felt himself slipping toward unconsciousness, felt death's approach like a cold tide rising, and in that moment, that eternal split second between life and whatever came after, he saw her. A woman in white standing in the fire and smoke, not burned, not panicked, just standing there, impossibly calm, impossibly present, her face tilted toward him with an expression he couldn't read through the haze of trauma and shock. She was beautiful in a way that transcended physical description, radiant, sorrowful, ancient and ageless all at once. Her robes moved in a wind that didn't exist. Her eyes held something Daniel's fragmenting consciousness recognized even through disbelief. Compassion. "No," he tried to say, but no sound came. "You're not real. You're not..." She moved closer, knelt beside him in the burning wreckage, placed a hand on his shattered chest, and though Daniel's body was broken beyond repair, though every nerve screamed with agony, he felt something else beneath the pain. Peace. Impossible, irrational, undeniable peace. Then darkness took him, and he knew nothing more. Daniel woke 16 days later in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, the largest American military hospital outside the United States. The first thing he became aware of was pain, not the sharp agony of the blast, but a deep grinding ache that suffused his entire body. The second thing was the mechanical beeping of monitors. The third was the realization that he couldn't feel his legs, because they weren't there. His right leg was gone from mid-thigh, his left from just below the knee. Both limbs terminated in heavily bandaged stumps that looked obscene beneath the thin hospital sheets. Shrapnel scars crisscrossed his chest and arms. His ribs were wrapped. A breathing tube had recently been removed, leaving his throat raw. A nurse appeared when the monitors registered his elevated heart rate. "Sergeant Kearns, welcome back. You're in Germany. You're safe. Try not to move." Daniel didn't hear the rest. His mind had locked onto a single devastating reality. His legs were gone. His career was over. His life as he'd known it had ended in that fireball outside Fallujah. "The others," he croaked. "My vehicle." The nurse's expression told him everything before she spoke. "I'll get the doctor. He can give you details. But Sergeant, you need to stay calm." Tommy Reeves, dead. Marcus Chen, critical condition, extensive burns. Luis Ortega, killed instantly by the blast that Daniel had somehow survived. The soldier who'd prayed before every mission hadn't made it home. The rosary he'd clutched had done nothing to save him. And Daniel, who'd mocked every prayer, who'd called the Virgin Mary a myth, he'd survived. The irony was so bitter it choked him. For weeks Daniel existed in a fog of pain medication and despair. Surgeons performed multiple operations to clean his wounds, to prevent infection, to salvage what remained. Physical therapists came daily, beginning the brutal process of preparing him for prosthetics. Psychologists visited, asking careful questions about his mental state, watching for signs of suicidal ideation. They had reason to watch. Daniel's rage was palpable. He snapped at nurses, refused therapy, threw medication containers at the walls. The doctors called it normal, grief, trauma, adjustment to catastrophic injury. They prescribed antidepressants and patience. But beneath the anger was something Daniel couldn't name, a question that gnawed at him during the long nights when pain kept sleep at bay. What had he seen in that burning Humvee? His rational mind insisted it was hallucination. Combat trauma plus blood loss plus dying brain cells equals visions. Happens all the time. Nothing supernatural about it. But the image wouldn't fade. The woman in white, her impossible calm, the way she'd knelt beside him, placed her hand on his chest, the peace that had flooded through him even as his body shattered. Father Walsh visited 3 weeks into Daniel's stay. The chaplain had survived the blast. His vehicle had been at the rear of the convoy, and had flown to Germany specifically to check on the wounded. He found Daniel staring at the ceiling, refusing lunch, the picture of bitter resignation. "Sergeant Kearns," Father Walsh said gently, "may I sit? Free country, free hospital, sit wherever you want." The chaplain pulled up a chair. For a moment he said nothing, just sat in silence that felt less uncomfortable than Daniel expected. "I heard about Ortega," Father Walsh finally said. "I know you two were close." "We weren't close. He was in my vehicle. That's not the same thing." "He spoke about you often, said you challenged him to think deeper about his faith." Daniel laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I called his faith stupid. I told him his rosary was useless. And you know what? I was right. He prayed every single day and he's dead anyway. So much for divine protection. And you're alive." "Don't." Daniel's voice went cold. "Don't you dare suggest I survived because of some divine plan. Random chance, Father. The bomb was positioned wrong, or the angle was off, or I got lucky. That's it. There's no meaning here, no lesson, just physics and probability." Father Walsh nodded slowly. "I won't argue with you, Daniel. You've been through something I can't fully understand. But I will tell you this. Ortega died holding his rosary, and his last words, according to Marcus Chen, who was beside him, were, 'Holy Mary, protect us.' And she didn't. She protected you." The words hung in the air. Daniel wanted to rage, to throw Father Walsh out, to scream that there was no protection, no Mary, no meaning to any of this. But he was too exhausted, too broken, too empty. "I don't believe, Father. Not anymore. Maybe I never really did." "Belief isn't required for grace, Daniel. Just openness." The chaplain left. Daniel returned to staring at the ceiling, and he tried very hard not to think about the woman in white he'd seen in the fire. It happened on a Tuesday night. 6 weeks after the blast, Daniel had been moved to a private room, standard for long-term recovery patients. The room was quiet after evening rounds, most of the hospital settling into the relative calm of night shift. His pain medication had been reduced as his body healed, leaving him in a state of uncomfortable awareness but not quite agony. He couldn't sleep. The stumps where his legs had been ached with phantom pain, his brain insisting limbs existed that were long gone, sending distress signals for feet that would never touch ground again. He'd been warned about this, told it was normal, given medication that didn't help. At 0247 hours, he'd been watching the clock, counting minutes until the next pain med dose. The room changed, the light shifted. Not dramatically, not like someone had flipped a switch, just a subtle brightening, as if moonlight had intensified, or some invisible source had begun to glow. The quality of the air changed too, became warmer, gentler, less sterile. Daniel's heart rate spiked. The monitors registered it with rapid beeping, and at the foot of his bed she appeared, the woman in white from the burning Humvee, the impossible figure his rational mind had dismissed as hallucination. She stood exactly as she had in the wreckage, serene, radiant, dressed in robes that seemed to move in an absent wind. Her face held the same sorrowful compassion. Her eyes, dark and deep and ancient, looked directly at him. Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except stare at the apparition that violated every law of physics and reality he'd built his worldview upon. "You're not real," he whispered. "Pain meds, trauma, PTSD. You're not—" She tilted her head slightly, the movement so human and yet so otherworldly it made his chest tighten. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, not whispered, but carrying the quality of intimacy, as if they were alone in a cathedral rather than a military hospital. "I was there." 3 words, simple, devastating. "Where?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Where were you?" "In the fire. When you called me a myth." Her expression didn't change. No accusation, no anger, just infinite sadness. "I was there when the bomb exploded. I was there when your brothers died. I was there when you believed you were dying." "That's impossible. You can't." Daniel's medical training, his years of rational thought, everything he'd constructed to explain the universe crashed against the evidence of his senses. "People don't just appear in hospital rooms." "No," she agreed softly. "They don't." The implication hung between them. Daniel's hands clutched the bedsheets. "Why? Why are you here? To punish me for what I said? To prove me wrong? To—" She moved. Not walked. Moved. One moment at the foot of the bed, the next beside him, close enough that he could see details no hallucination should have. The weave of her robe, the faint lines around her eyes, suggesting both youth and agelessness, the way light seemed to emanate from her rather than reflect off her. "To answer a prayer," she said. "I'm not praying. I haven't prayed in years." "Not your prayer?" Her gaze shifted to the bandaged stumps beneath the sheets. "His." "Whose?" Daniel's breath caught. "Ortega." "Luis prayed for you every night, prayed that your heart would heal, that you would find what you lost when your mother died." She paused, and something in her expression shifted to even deeper sorrow. "He prayed for you, even as he was dying?" "Holy Mary, protect us." "He meant you." Tears Daniel hadn't known he was capable of producing streamed down his face. "He's dead. His prayers didn't save him. His prayers saved you." "I don't want to be saved. I want—" Daniel's voice broke completely. "I want to die. I want to be with them. I don't want to be the one who survived when better men didn't." The woman in white reached out and placed her hand on the bandaged stumps where Daniel's legs had been. He flinched, expecting pain, but instead felt warmth spreading through ruined flesh. Not physical healing. The legs didn't regenerate. The damage didn't reverse. But something else healed. Something deeper than tissue and bone. The crushing weight of guilt lifted slightly. The rage that had burned in him since his mother's death cooled to something bearable. The despair that had made every waking moment agony loosened its grip. "You think you survived by chance," she said quietly. "You think random probability spared you while taking Luis. But Daniel—" And the sound of his name in her voice was like hearing it for the first time, like being known completely. "There is no chance. There is only choice. Luis chose to pray for you. I chose to answer. And now you must choose what to do with the life his prayers purchased." "I don't know how to live like this." Daniel gestured to his missing legs, his scarred body, the wreckage of his former self. "I don't know who I am without—" "You are who you have always been. A warrior, a protector, a man searching for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless." She withdrew her hand, and the warmth faded, but didn't disappear entirely. "But now you must decide. Will you spend what remains of your life insisting I am a myth, or will you allow the possibility that you have been wrong?" Before Daniel could respond, she began to fade. Not dramatically, not with light shows or sounds, just a gradual dissolution, like morning mist burning off under sunrise. "Wait," Daniel called out, reaching for her with shaking hands. "Wait, I can't—" "You can," she said, her voice now distant, "because you are not alone. You have never been alone." Then she was gone. The room returned to normal. Standard hospital lighting, standard temperature, standard sounds of machines and distant footsteps. Nothing remained, to prove she'd been there except the warmth still lingering in Daniel's chest and the tears still streaming down his face. A nurse appeared moments later, alerted by the monitor spikes. "Sergeant Kearns, are you all right? Your heart rate—" "Did you see her?" Daniel asked urgently. "The woman in white. She was just here. Did you see her leave?" The nurse's expression shifted to concern. "Sir, there's been no one in this room except you. I've been at the nurse's station the whole time. I can see your door from there. No one came in or out." Daniel stared at her, his mind reeling. "Check the logs. Check the cameras. Someone had to—" "I'll check," she said gently, in the tone medical professionals use with patients who might be experiencing psychological distress. "But right now, let's focus on getting your vitals stabilized." She was kind, competent, utterly convinced he'd been hallucinating, and Daniel couldn't blame her because he wanted to believe the same thing. But the warmth in his chest didn't fade, and when he finally slept that night, really slept deeply, without nightmares. He dreamed of Ortega praying beside his bunk, rosary in hand, whispering intercessions for a sergeant who'd mocked him. Daniel requested to see Father Walsh the next morning. The chaplain arrived within 2 hours, finding Daniel sitting up in bed, the first time he'd done so voluntarily in weeks, holding the rosary that had been among Ortega's effects, sent to Daniel as next of kin since Ortega's family lived abroad. "Tell me everything you know about Marian apparitions," Daniel said without preamble. Father Walsh's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a departure from our last conversation." "I saw her." Daniel's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "Last night, in this room. She spoke to me." The chaplain pulled up a chair, his expression carefully neutral. "Tell me what happened." Daniel told him everything. The light, the woman in white, her words about Luis's prayers, the warmth that had flooded through him. Father Walsh listened without interruption, his face giving away nothing. When Daniel finished, the chaplain was quiet for a long time. "You think I'm crazy," Daniel said, "or that it was pain meds?" "I think," Father Walsh said carefully, "that the Virgin Mary has appeared to countless people throughout history, usually to those who are suffering, lost, or in desperate need. Sometimes these appearances are validated by the Church after extensive investigation. Sometimes they remain personal experiences that can't be proven, but profoundly change the person who experienced them. So you believe me. I believe that you experienced something, whether it was the Blessed Mother herself, or your mind's way of processing trauma and grief. Does it matter?" "Yes," Daniel said fiercely. "Yes, it matters. Because if it was real, if she was really here, then I've been wrong about everything. My mother's prayers weren't wasted, Ortega's faith wasn't delusion, and His voice broke. "I called her a myth while she was watching over me." Father Walsh leaned forward. "Daniel, faith isn't about being right or wrong. It's about trust. Can you trust that something larger than yourself is at work, even when you don't understand it?" Daniel looked down at Ortega's rosary, the beads worn smooth from years of prayer. "I don't know, but I want to try." The transformation didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. But over the following weeks, something shifted in Daniel Kearns. He stopped fighting the physical therapy, pushing himself through the brutal process of learning to function without legs. He accepted visits from the psychologist and actually engaged instead of stonewalling. He began reading, not technical manuals or military history, but books on faith, on suffering, on finding meaning in trauma. And he prayed, awkwardly at first, uncertain of the words, feeling foolish talking to someone he couldn't see. But he persisted, holding Ortega's rosary and whispering Hail Marys he barely remembered from childhood. Nurse Amelia Crawford, who'd been assigned to his care, noticed the change. "Whatever happened," she told him one morning, while checking his vitals. "Keep doing it. You're healing better than anyone expected." "What do you mean?" "Your wounds. The infection that wouldn't clear, it's gone. Your pain levels have dropped significantly. The doctors can't explain it." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And I saw something, Sergeant. That night you asked about a woman in white. I was coming down the hall, and I saw light coming from under your door. Not normal light, something brighter. And when I reached your room, I could have sworn I saw someone standing by your bed." Daniel's heart raced. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't believe it myself. Still don't, really. But..." She trailed off, her scientific training warring with what her eyes had witnessed. "But something happened in this room that night. Something I can't explain." 3 months after the blast, Daniel was transferred to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., for continued treatment and prosthetic fitting. The day before his transfer, Father Walsh came to say goodbye. "I'll be praying for you," the chaplain said. "Thank you, Father, for believing me, or at least not calling me crazy." Father Walsh smiled. "Daniel, I've been a chaplain for 20 years. I've seen men survive things that should have killed them. I've witnessed deathbed conversions and foxhole prayers and moments of grace that defy explanation. So when a soldier tells me the Blessed Mother appeared to him, I listen. Do you think it was really her? Or just my mind? Does it matter?" Father Walsh repeated his earlier question. "Your life changed that night. You found hope where there was despair. You opened your heart to the possibility of meaning. Whether the Virgin Mary physically manifested or touched your soul in ways beyond physical presence, the result is the same. You were transformed." At Walter Reed, Daniel threw himself into recovery with an intensity that impressed his medical team. He mastered his prosthetics faster than typical patients. He excelled in occupational therapy. He began volunteering with newly wounded soldiers, offering the kind of hope he'd once refused to accept for himself. And he visited Luis Ortega's family. The Ortegas lived in a small town in Texas, in a modest house filled with photographs of their son. When Daniel knocked on their door, walking on prosthetic legs, leaning on a cane, wearing his dress uniform, Luis's mother took one look at him and burst into tears. "You were with him," she said, in accented English. "At the end." "Yes, Mum." Daniel's throat tightened. "I was in the vehicle when... I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him." Mrs. Ortega pulled him into a fierce hug. "You have nothing to apologize for. Luis loved being a soldier. He loved serving with you." "I wasn't good to him," Daniel confessed, the words tumbling out. "I mocked his faith. I called him weak for praying. I said terrible things about the Virgin Mary, about everything he believed, and he died praying for me. For us. I don't deserve..." "Mijo," Mrs. Ortega said, holding his face in her work-worn hands. "Luis knew who you were, knew your pain, your anger. He prayed for you every single night. He told me you were searching, that you just didn't know what you were looking for." She guided him into the house to a small altar much like the one Daniel's mother had kept. A statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe stood at its centre, surrounded by votives and photographs of Luis. "He left something for you," she said, pulling a small box from a drawer. "In case something happened to him, he wanted you to have this." Inside was Luis's prayer card, Our Lady of Guadalupe, laminated and worn, and a handwritten note. "Sergeant Kearns, if you're reading this, something happened to me. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame God. And don't give up on faith just because you're angry. The Virgin Mary sees you. She's always seen you, even when you couldn't see her. Trust her. She brought me home safe so many times. If my number was up, that's just how it goes. But you're still here for a reason. Find it. Live it. And remember me sometimes when you pray." Your brother in arms, Luis Daniel wept openly, his body shaking with sobs that had been building since the blast. Mrs. Ortega held him while he cried, whispering prayers in Spanish, and he felt in that moment the same warmth he'd felt when the woman in white had touched his wounds. He stayed with the Ortegas for 3 days, attended Mass with them at their parish, knelt before the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe that Luis had prayed to his entire life, and he whispered the same prayer Luis had prayed for him. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, watch over those who are lost. Help them find their way home.